Good afternoon. I'm Tara Pixley, a photojournalist and news media scholar, and I'll be moderating today's panel. I just wanted to get started with a little bit of an introduction of sort of what we're going to be talking about. So each of the organizations represented here today as part of Reclaim Photo are fighting against photojournalism's tradition of excluding particular viewpoints. It's easy to say that the lack of women, people of color, and non-Western photojournalists behind the documentary camera is unintentional or is due to some sort of indeterminate circumstance. It's much harder to put energy and time into figuring out why that's happening and how to truly address it. This is the undertaking of Reclaim, to identify the why behind the persistent underrepresentation and exclusion of the photographers we represent. And with that, I'd like to throw it over to each organization's member to introduce their own organization, starting with Daniella.
Thank you. My name is Daniella Zalcman. I am a documentary photographer and also the founder of Women Photograph, which is an organization striving to elevate the voices of female identifying, and non-binary visual journalists. I started Women Photograph in February of this year, and we now have a database of 600 independent photographers based in 87 countries around the world. In addition to that, we run a grants program, a mentorship program, and a travel fund.
Hey, I'm Brent Lewis. I am I'm a picture editor over at ESPN's The Undefeated, but I'm also one part of the crew that just created Diversify Photo, which is a new database of photographers of color based in the U.S. that are willing to do editorial work across the gamut. So we just want to, right now I think we're at 375 names and growing, and by all means wanting to do more work. So I'm going to pass it over.
Hi, I'm Shahidul. I'm a photographer, writer, and curator and activist from Bangladesh. I set up an agency called Zrik in 1989, largely because we felt there was a need for a platform for local storytellers. That went on. I set up a school of photography called Pathshala, a festival of photography called Chobi Mela. But the most recent one, and the reason I'm here now, is because I set up an agency called Majority World. And the term Majority World is something I began using in the 90s because we were very uncomfortable being called third world, or least developing country, or developing country. So we thought we'd start with the lexicon.
Laura Beltrán Villamizar. I am a photo editor and a curator. I used to work for WordPress Photo. And after that, I saw the lack of representation from, especially from Latin American, African, and Asian photographers. That's the main reason why I started Native. And Native is also a platform that wants to kind of like build bridges between the media organizations, editors, and photographers from underrepresented communities and regions.
My name is Austin Merrill. I'm a journalist, mostly a writer, based here in New York. In 2012, with Peter DeCampo, started Everyday Africa, which then sort of exploded into many other everyday feeds. There's hundreds of them, geographic-based and issue-based feeds all over the world. And so we now have an umbrella nonprofit called the Everyday Projects, which is working to try to combat the stereotypes of many of these parts of the world, and try to show the beautiful and the mundane and find a way to make the everyday interesting.
Thanks to all of you. So today we want to talk about how to make change in photojournalism and why it's imperative that we do. We really want this to be a discussion, so I'm going to throw out a question to the group, and if any of you has any ideas or thoughts or anything you want to ask, then just raise your hand and we'll work that out. So first I wanted to ask, what was the kind of personal moment or the experience that you had that made you each say, okay, this has to stop, that now I'm creating this organization? Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you want to start with Austin or backwards?
Yeah, I'll start. Yeah.
Peter and I were on an assignment in Ivory Coast in the spring of 2012. Peter had been a Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana. I had been a Peace Corps volunteer in Ivory Coast. We were there to cover a story that was about a country trying to recover from conflict. It was an important story. It was a story that no one was really paying attention to. It wasn't in the news very much. So we felt very dedicated to trying to give this story some coverage. It was an important thing that was undercovered. However, here we are on the ground doing this reporting and suddenly discovering that what we're doing is adding to the narrative that you always see. More photographs and interviews of former child soldiers, of refugees, of victims of war crimes. And while the story we were there to report was important, we also felt like there was something more important to say, that for the vast majority of the people, the vast majority of the time, life's pretty normal and looks a whole lot like our own. And that's the thing you don't see in the news. So that's how Everyday Africa began. That was the moment when we sort of realized that this is something that needs to be addressed. And we were very happy to see that others felt the same way and sort of jumped on board within Everyday Africa and then, the other everyday projects everywhere. But that was the moment when we sort of discovered that, this story is important, but there are other stories that are even more important.
As a Latin American, I was struck by my work at World Press Photo, which is the biggest, kind of like the Pulitzer for photojournalism, based in Amsterdam. And throughout the years, I saw the work of amazing photographers that would been awarded, but eventually I saw the lack of diversity when it comes to photographers from Latin America. Well, in my case, from my region, but also from other regions. And then we worked with the new university to set up a report that would kind of like highlight or put numbers behind the lack of representation or the state of the industry through World Press. And that's when kind of like the numbers hit me really hard. And I realized that, that there were kind of like non-photographers from Africa or Latin America. And with that thought, we set up a masterclass in Mexico. So it was the first kind of like a regional masterclass with only photographers from that region. And that's when I saw, the amount of work that was being produced that was not being seen by editors here. And that's when kind of like realized like, okay, there's something that we need to do, and there's some breaches that we need to build to have the work of these photographers be seen.
This was in the late 80s. I was having an exhibition in Belfast, and I was staying in a small town called Newry, very close to Belfast. And my Irish friends, Paddy and Deborah, they didn't have a big house. So their 5-year-old daughter, Karina, moved to their room to make space for Uncle Shahidul. I love kids, and Karina and I, we were very good friends. I come back from the show one day, and I'm in the room emptying out. I had some coins in my pocket, so I'm putting those coins on the table. And Karina's at the doorway, and usually when she sees me, she runs up, jumps into my arm, and we tell each other stories. That day, she's standing at the door, just staring at me. I said, "What's the matter, Karina?" She says, "You've got money?" I said, "Yes, I've got money." But you're from Bangladesh. Now, this little kid couldn't work it out. Here's a 5-year-old girl who's grown up in an environment where she's incapable of seeing a Bangladeshi as anything other than an icon of poverty. And it got me asking questions about what environment this child grew up in that prevented her from seeing me as anything other than that. And that was when I began to question who the storytellers were. And it's pretty obvious that who the storyteller is determines how the story gets told. And I recognized that most of the people telling the stories were white Western photographers who came over to my country, and they had a stereotype, they had a notion of what this country was, and that was what they were feeding. And I felt that change needed to happen, and that's how we set out the RIC, later on the School of Photography, the festival. But then we thought that this idea needed to be broader, others need to be included. So initially, introducing the term majority world in place of third world, but also making it open to many more people. And then just look at these people here. I mean, the fact that you have a panel here of this sort is in itself very, very unusual in the field of photography.
All right, so Diversify was a weird path. I left the world of being a photographer, full-time staff photographer, to become an editor. And so one of the things I did when I came over to The Undefeated was I wanted to recreate Ebony. Ebony magazine, for those who don't know, was the premier African-American magazine back in the 60s, 70s, up until recently. But they had a staff of all black photographers. So I knew, I was like, if we're gonna tell the story of black people, I want to have a staff that reflects that understands that. So I went on the hunt, and I was like, all right, let me find out who I know. You know, I got like my own little spreadsheet of people I already know, and I was like, this only comes up to 50, and majority of them are in New York, a sprinkle in Chicago, and a sprinkle in LA. And I was like, all right, this is a problem, so I need to start digging. But what really pushed it over, and I realized that maybe this list was something that needs to grow and be bigger and needs to go out to other editors, was ironically Afropunk last year. The entire festival is, if you don't know what Afropunk is, it's a black festival. It's about black love, black beauty, things like that. And so hearing people who went to the festival last year was like, oh, there were only 2 photographers that were black at that festival, and that blew me away. All the rest of the story was being told by white men or women in some cases. I think there's only like 1 or 2 women on that, so mostly white men. And I was like, that's insane. You can't tell me an editor could not find a black photographer in the middle of New York in Brooklyn. Like, that's insane. So I started accumulating my list. I'm like, all right, we need to get this bigger. We need to grow. And so I was talking to some other friends. So like, well, there's a need all across. There's not just the one minority, African Americans. There's a need in Hispanic people. There's a need in Asian culture. There's just this need. So it grew. It blossomed. So we put an open call out. We got 1,500 responses back from people who were like, I want to be part of this. I need to be a part of this. I want to help tell this story. So after a lot of vetting process, we brought it down to like 300 or so, and we just put the list out, the spreadsheet out, and the website is launched. So that's where it came from. So shout out to Afropunk for making change in more than one way.
So I'm a documentary photographer myself, and I've looked at the past 3 years now of World Press State of the Industry reports, and that persistent number, that 15% of the industry that is made up of women, continually baffled me, because I think I've been lucky. I came up in New York at a time where there were starting to be quite a few strong, amazing, talented, brilliant woman photographers. So I always have been surrounded by incredible female documentarians. And so that number didn't feel accurate, but when you actually look at the front pages of our newspapers, when you actually look at the ways in which our world is represented, it is overwhelmingly, those stories are overwhelmingly told through a male lens. And I want to take a quick second to derail and say that, just as a point of clarification, the reason why we are all here together today, this is not just about equality, this is not just about equity, this is about making sure that we are responsible as a storytelling community. You cannot hope to accurately tell stories of people around the world with nuance if your storytellers are not as diverse as the people we are representing. That's just a fact. You know, when you are looking at stories about the Latino experience, about the LGBTQI experience, about female issues, if you are not consulting with someone in your newsroom who can identify, who can make sure that you're being sensitive and correct and respectful, that's a huge problem. To get back to Women Photograph, I was at ARL, the photo festival last year, and I'm lucky in that I'm at a point in my career where most of my work is coming from grants. So I can afford to be the shrill feminist harpy in the room and make a bunch of noise, because I'm fine with pissing off editors. It's okay, it's not gonna impact my practice all that much. It's a reason why a lot of women won't make noise, because it will impact their ability to get assignments and get jobs. And so I completely understand that. There's a reason for that. But I started interrogating the photo editors I was talking to and asking them why there was one person who was there who I had monitored the number of assignments he'd given out in his first year of working at a publication, and out of roughly 45, he had hired one woman. And so I was asking these people, why is this still happening? I can tell you about lots of women photographers who are doing incredible work, and the answer I kept getting was, well, I don't know where to find them. I don't know where to find a woman in Afghanistan. I don't know where to find a woman who likes to shoot science stories. And so I put together a Google spreadsheet, and I said, look, this panel is amazing, but I've been on a lot of panels where I feel like I'm just shouting into the void over and over and over again. And so I said, I'm tired of talking. I am tired of having conversations that don't go anywhere. So I made Women Photograph. I made a list of 600 independent female and non-binary documentary photographers, so that the next time a photo editor tried to use that excuse with me, I could say, hey, I got something for you, no more excuses. And that is, I think, behind everything that all of us have done, is to create meaningful solutions, because we're tired of just talking.
Oh, I just hate the excuse of, we couldn't find anyone. We didn't know.
Try harder.
Do better. Thank you all. So as you're talking, you're kind of bringing up a few points of vetting and like how you actually get to the photographers that you include in your various databases or the curated Instagram. Could you all speak to what that vetting process looks like and how you determine which photographers you're going to represent across your organizations?
So for Everyday Africa, I mean, I can't really speak to all of the different Everyday feeds. They're similar in lots of ways, but for Everyday Africa, you know, in the beginning, it was two white American guys who started this. Others became interested and started jumping on board, but we were very interested very early on in trying to find a way not only to have those of us in that small circle using this as a platform to tell stories about that part of the world to the West, but we also wanted to use it as a way to amplify the voices of the people there. And so we linked up with World Press to create the African Photojournalism Database as a way of trying to accumulate names of people, not so unlike what you're talking about, names of people who are photographers in Zimbabwe, in Tanzania, in Ivory Coast, who are from there, so that they could be connected with editors. We use that database to look for new contributors and also to help introduce them to editors all over the world. That's a process of, you know, finding people in these different countries who are able to tell these stories of everyday life and reaching out to them and trying to get them on board and involved. Once that happens within Everyday Africa, we just turn everybody loose. I mean, we don't have a curation. They just have the login information. They know what we're after, and they, whenever, you know, the only rule is not to step on the prior photographer's toes, give each image, you know, 3 hours or so to breathe before you post another one, and everyone sort of knows the kinds of things we're looking for. There are some curated feeds within the Everyday projects, but many of them work just like Everyday Africa. So once you've found someone that you trust, and a lot of this is about building trust, then they do as they will and post the images that they think are appropriate to what they're trying to tell.
In the case of Native, I think it was partly the work that I did for the African database for World Press and the first regional masterclass that we organized in Latin America. The group in Latin America was so wonderful, and everyone was so committed to spreading the word of World Press, but also they knew so many people in their own countries that were working in the field, that when I decided to step away from World Press and set up upon, you know, launching Native, I just started talking to people personally, especially to female photographers, because a lot of female photographers, they feel that they're not there yet to do something. So for me, it was very important to personally reach out to people and be like, hey, listen, I think your work is great. I think we need to, you know, I think we can work together. We can represent you. We can, you know, help you navigate the industry, even though 9 out of 10 times they would be like, yeah, I'm not there yet. I don't understand. I'm really scared. How do I reach to, you know, out to editors? So for me, it was a very personal approach. This is also kind of like the added value of Native, is that a lot of editors would come to me, be like, hey, listen, I've got I would love to work with someone in Madagascar, but I just don't know anyone, and I'm really scared to kind of like start a conversation with someone that I don't know, because obviously this is an assignment that is going to be, you know, this is my work. So in my case, having like this personal approach to the photographers that we were representing was a very important step. And like emphasizing on, you know, female photographers, because more often than not, they would not feel as if they were there yet. So yeah, that's how Native kind of works.
Okay, my personal work, documentary work, began when I was photographing a popular move to bring down a general who'd taken over my country. It happens. But while we're doing that, we're taking huge risks, taking these pictures, trying to send them out. For the first time in my life, I actually asked not to be credited because I needed to carry on working. It didn't matter in the end because no one was interested. Pictures of a democratic movement in Bangladesh just wasn't sexy enough. That wasn't a story. We managed to get this general down. We had a fair and free election. We had a new government. But shortly after that, we had a massive cyclone. And suddenly everyone was interested. A cyclone in Bangladesh. Now that is sexy. So everyone contacted us, including the New York Times, and I can see James Estrin there. So at that time, there was Nancy Lee was the deputy picture editor, and she wrote to us to say, well, look, we want some pictures. And she also sent sample pictures of the type of images they were interested in. And I wrote back to her to say, yeah, we've got those pictures, but we don't think that's a story. It's a very different story that needs to be told. To be fair, she responded saying, okay, tell us what it is. So we put together a photo story about reconstruction, about people rebuilding their lives, supporting each other, fishermen going back to sea, farmers planting seeds. A very positive story about the same situation. And we had a picture spread in August in '91. And to my knowledge, the only picture spread we ever saw about the cyclone, which did not feature a single body, which was a very different type of story. So my point is that it wasn't so much a question of photographers, it was more a question of educating the picture editors, the gatekeepers, the people who, perhaps for safety, perhaps because they don't want to take a risk, go with the tried and the tested. And to be fair, I think there are also people who have jobs, who are worried about making the wrong decisions, and are a little bit scared of going outside their zones of comfort. And I think we all need to go outside that zone of comfort, and not everyone is prepared to do that. And for some of us, it's a question of hand-holding, both at the photographer level, but also at the gatekeeper level. And I remind you of a very different structure in the sense that if there is a picture editor in New York commissioning a story in my country, in Bangladesh, and I'm photographing a farmer in the field, the person who's probably most knowledgeable about that situation is the farmer in the field. And the photographer, being close to that, is perhaps next in line. The person who knows the least is probably the picture editor in New York. But the person who decides is this picture editor in New York, and the farmer has zero say in how the story gets told. So that's a completely topsy-turvy mechanism of storytelling which needs to be questioned, and we need to be part of that process. And there is a collaboration that needs to take place.
So we're the new kids on the block, hardcore. So our vetting process was a little weird. I had amazing help from so many editors, including Jen Samuels. Jen Samuel, Jesus Christ, I put the S in there. I told you, it's this jewel thing. It's a South Side thing. It's a South Side Chicago thing. So we just kind of looked at the work of all the people, and we just, all the 1,500 names that came in, 1,500 photographers that came in, and we're just kind of looking at their work and like, will we hire them? Will we trust them with the assignment? Are they there yet? Are they ready? And so a lot of people were ready. A lot of people were like, oh my God, yes, I would hire this person right now. Or they're doing really, really good work, but they just haven't had that moment to take that leap into doing work on a larger scale. But I think I would trust them. And myself being the all trusting nature that I have, I'm like, yeah, put them on the list. That's fine. I would go with it. If someone has a problem and they don't do it right, I'm okay with that. But the big thing when it came to vetting for us was the idea that we need to have confidence in the people on this list, because we're throwing something at editors and they have the ability to use it or not. But I felt like if an editor came across a name and they tried them on an assignment and it didn't work out, they're less likely to use that list in the future. And that could literally ruin the whole thing. So as much as I am like, oh my God, yeah, he's fine. Where is he at? Okay, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I like that picture he took. That was real nice lighting. The only one. But we have to keep that in mind, that we are throwing something at editors that they might not feel comfortable with. They don't trust these people as much as they trust the same person, white male, that they've went to 75 times. This is a whole new name for them in a whole new place, and he might not be He might not come from OU, Ohio University. He might not come from a zoo. He might be self-taught and self-trained, but he does good work, and he knows this story better than anyone else. So we just had to kind of refine and pull back and like, would we trust this person? Would an editor see this work and understand where we were coming from making this choice to include this person on the list as well? So it's a give and take and give us some opportunities. But for the people that didn't make the list the first time around, we are definitely looking to find ways to help them move their career farther and increase their portfolio and give them the opportunity to prove themselves. So we definitely have like a little side list that we're not releasing of people that were like, all right, yeah, I'm going to throw them an assignment and see how they do. And if they do it, then boom, they're their next step because I trust them. And plus, it's my money. So if I burn something for ESPN, it's fine. No one's going to judge me.
Yeah, I wanted to add that I was talking to this editor from a big news organization here in the US that she went for this like unknown photographer in India that she didn't know. She was like, okay, I'm just gonna, and this poor guy, like during the time of the like when he had to hand in the work, he just went MIA. Like disappeared. And this girl, she's like, oh my God, trying to find this poor guy. He's like disappeared. And last minute, he shows up and he's like, I'm so sorry. I freaked out. This is my first big assignment. I just don't know what I'm doing. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And this indeed shows that if these photographers would have like the guidance just to like finish it up or the guts, like, and it will happen and they will respond. There is just this little that they lack in this or a platform or someone to talk to that will tell them like, you need to go for it. And you might make a mistake, but you need to respond. And that's how you're gonna keep on getting assignments. So they need this voice or they need this support that the industry is not able or not willing to provide. So this, I guess, this is also what we want to achieve and what we want to do.
And it can be really intimidating if you're coming from a position where you're like, well, I'm representing all black people in America right now as a photojournalist to do this.
Yeah,
I'm
for sure.
representing all Bangladeshis. So yeah, that's something that I think we should also take into consideration, like how intimidating and intense it can be for photographers who are incredible photographers, but just getting their like entree into this world of the big assignments. Sorry.
No, not at all. So Brent and I had several conversations about this early on, and we took two very, very different approaches. I think the optimal solution is somewhere in the middle. When I started Women Photograph, it wasn't an open, I didn't do an open call because I knew that was going to be a nightmare for me personally. But what I did is the only parameters of Women Photograph are you female identifying, or non-binary, and do you have 5 years of work experience in the field? And so, there are a couple of people on there who are definitely early on in their career who maybe are not ready for an assignment with one of the big newspapers. But 5 years is a long time to be an independent photographer, photojournalist. If you've made it past that benchmark, you've seen some shit. You've gotten through a lot. So I am comfortable with that. I think I've intentionally booted out 2 people who signed up to the database, and one of them used a racial slur in her email address, and so that it didn't matter how good her work was. She just wasn't. It wasn't a group she belonged to, and that wasn't. But part of the thing for me is also Women Photograph is about magnitude and about sheer numbers, and I can't be up here without taking a tiny dig at Nikon. But when we're seeing things like that lovely matrix of brand ambassadors of 32 male faces, that when I can counter with a website of 600 female non-binary photojournalists, that's meaningful to me. So I completely agree with a lot of the points that are being made about, look, if you want a resource to be respected and used and utilized repeatedly, you do need a benchmark. But I also believe in power of numbers as well. So I
Taking risks.
Yeah, exactly.
As a photo editor,
yeah. Also, good photo editors, like, you're not going to just willy-nilly hire someone. You're going to look at their website, and so we have a public website, which is womenphotograph.com, which I invite you to browse. We also have a container 37. But there's a private database that any photo editor or commissioning organization can get access to by contacting me directly, and that spreadsheet has information about languages spoken, geographical areas of expertise, do you have hostile environment training, who are your regular clients, every piece of information a photo editor might want to know before hiring you. So there's a lot of information. I don't think anyone is going to use it in risky ways.
I think one of the nice things about what we're all trying to do, and the nice thing about this day and age, is that maybe 30 years ago, an unknown photographer would have a difficult time trying to find a way to make his or her work known to editors. Budgets have been shrinking for a long time now. There's a lot less international news coverage in the New York Times and elsewhere. But with all these social media platforms and the internet, there's plenty of other ways to see the work of others. And so thanks to Instagram, thanks to these other platforms, you can actually point to something and get your work sort of seen by the gatekeepers easier than you once could.
I'd like to move away a little bit in terms of who and what to the principles. And I'm going to be very blunt here. It's not photography we're talking about. We're talking about racism, we're talking about sexism. And unless those things are there and addressed, we will never deal with this. And the irony is, most of the people involved are not people who see themselves either as racist or sexist, yet in their practice, in terms of what they've done, in terms of the commissioning, they condone or put up with or allow to happen a structure which reflects that position. And I think that needs to be turned around. And therefore, it is a question of us who believe in a different world of saying, okay, let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's actually hire people. Let's go through the process. And I remember a situation. This was a show in London at Oxford Tower, which was, it was a well-known agency that was curating it. And I saw, it was about the Millennium Development Goals. And there were 8 European white photographers, actually including a woman. But the point was that there was no one from the majority world. So I brought it up to one of the agencies who'd commissioned the work, and they said, well, we spoke to the curator, well, the agency head, and he said, well, they don't have the eye. Now, to be able to make a statement like that and think you can get away with it, you couldn't say that about pretty much any group and hope to get away with it. Yet with photographers,
I hear it about women all the time.
Yeah. So we actually put together a calendar the next year calling Having the Eye, where we put together a group of work by fabulous photographers. They're there. Brilliant work is being produced. I think we operate in a very unequal playing field, and that's what needs to be addressed.
I want to take a minute to check in with the audience. Do we have a question? I'm going to take this, actually, if that's okay, or start off with. So I'm really glad you asked that question, because I think one of the things that's coming up here a lot is the photo editor's role and how that actually can sort of like transgress certain things that are happening at the photographer level, where, when I first started having access to the wires, I was working as a photo editor at CNN, I was appalled by the difference in what the options were and what actually made it into print or publication. And I think that calling that out as, just like starting to call that out and to point out how photo editors are primarily white and not always necessarily male, but primarily white, primarily from a certain class privilege, and often very much implicit in things that they're not acknowledging they're implicit in. They're the first ones to say, I'm not racist, I'm not sexist, but it's this idea of, it's like merit-based. They believe that like, oh, we're here because we're great, and not recognizing that, oh, actually you're there because like your dad could afford to put you up in a condo in New York while you interned for a while and went to like NYU. So those sorts of things, like really making that explicit and encouraging people to be allies in the way that they're recognizing their own biases and how those biases, however unintentional they may be, still create these transgressions and create spaces of oppression where photojournalists and the stories of certain communities are either not being told at all or are being misrepresented in these like very stereotypical ways. So yeah, calling that out and then trying to sort of offer opportunities to be more inclusive, like a lot of these lists do. I don't know if anyone has any other.
Yeah, I think a huge part of it is that for a long time we haven't had these conversations about how we need to reframe and rethink about the base structures of our society. You know, a meritocracy is invalid in a society that values the wrong things. So when people respond to me in regards to the Nikon grid of male photographers and say, well, they just pick the best photographers, that isn't actually a valid argument when we value the male gaze more than we value the female gaze. So I mean, I can go on that for a long time, but you know, we really need to rethink, reframe. We all collectively use the word decolonize a lot because unfortunately, journalism, photojournalism, many parts of the structure of our existence in this country are deeply colonial. We believe in our industry that we have more of a right to tell the stories of people elsewhere in the world than they do, and that is categorically untrue. I am not arguing to say that only people of a community can tell those stories. We need insider and outsider perspectives. I welcome you to explore the Women Photograph container that interrogates some of these topics. But we need to make sure there's a balance. And for a very, very long time, we have had one explicit viewpoint. And so whether it's trying to explain to my male colleagues that I am taken less seriously than them because I am a woman working in the field, whether it's explaining that your race often plays into where you're allowed to go and document and why, you know, we need to share these experiences, and we also need people in positions of power to listen and to be on board with being our allies. Because at this point, now that we are having this conversation, if you are not actively working to do better and to make change, you are part of the problem. I'm going to credit that phrase to a great ally in the middle of the room, Mr. Estrin, who is one of the best humans out there. But this, it's too late now. It's, you know, we are at a point where we're done talking. We need to actually do something about this, and all of us need to do better. I need to do better. You all need to do better. We need to work harder for change.
Yes, speaking of the role of editors, the fact that there is a lack of representation of editors, photo editors from the Latin American diaspora, the African diaspora in the US, has an impact on the stories that are being published on those like communities and regions in the US, but also the way we as Latinos in Latin America or Africans in Africa see ourselves, because this is what we get to see about ourselves. So we start to position ourselves kind of like in a like what Shahidul was saying, like a third world people, and that is extremely dangerous, and this is what is dividing our societies. So the role of the editors is just as important as the role of the photographer. So yeah, if I see no role model of a Latina or Latino photo editor, how am I supposed to learn how to cope with the stories that are supposed to be put out there for African, Asian, or Latin American communities in the US and elsewhere?
So we have 2 more questions, and we're at 15, so I'm going to jump it back to you. Yeah, class privilege is something that I think everyone feels super uncomfortable calling out. Like, it's easier almost to talk about race and gender and sexuality at this point, but pointing out like, well, you maybe kind of got there because you have a lot of money and you were able to go to Harvard or these things. Yeah, that's become like, I feel like a tricky thing to really help like force people to understand and discuss.
You want to go?
No, okay. Well, what I did in my case is to create a school from scratch, and now it's a school that recognizes one of the finest schools of photography in the world, with great photographers on a regular basis coming out from it. It can be done. If it can be done with minimum resources in a country like Bangladesh, it can be done anywhere in the world. But I think some hard questions also need to be asked, because the gatekeepers are important, and those structures need to be questioned. In its 62-year history of World Press, I'm the only person of color who's chaired the jury. Now, while I like to think I'm a good photographer, there's no way, I can say that there is no other photographer who's capable of filling that role. It's just World Press Photo hasn't been asked that tough question. How come? In 62 years, there's only been one person of color who's chaired your jury. I think it's a tough question that needs to be asked, and it needs to be asked all the time.
And another thing, so when coming in the issue of class, like, I am from the south side of Chicago. I grew up a single mother. We had days where, food was scarce and we got by. But I also had the ability for a lot of people reached out to me. A lot of people gave me opportunities. I didn't have the world. I didn't come from an OU or one of the legacy schools, but I had people who looked out for me and kind of saw that potential. And so people gave me the opportunities for like the Eddie Adams workshop. And Jim, oh my God, thank you. Gave me the opportunity for the first New York Portfolio Review where I met so many people. And I think that one, along with the Eddie Adams workshop, changed my life. But it was those abilities to get in those rooms is what really does it. And I know a lot of us here are working on grants, because to get photographers who might not have that ability to find their way into it, or can't afford that trip to New York, or can't afford that trip to LA to meet with editors, that is what's going to honestly open more doors. Because that FaceTime is what really changes, I feel like, a lot of things. For an editor to sit face to face with someone and be like, oh my God, I see your work, I see what you're doing, I know you, and we've had this conversation, we broke bread, and now I trust you with something. I can trust you with an assignment. So I know, at least for me, that's the one big thing, is getting people more of that FaceTime, and I think that's going to come through grants, and that's going to come from other workshops that might need to be created, and things like that. Yes.
I would, two things. I can talk about this on a macro level, and maybe I can do that one-on-one with you, because Women Photograph, we have grants, we have a travel fund, we are trying our hardest. You know, I am a woman of color, but I didn't have to pay for college. I come from a huge position of financial privilege, and I know that is a huge part of why I was able to spend the first 5 years of my career working as a starving freelancer in New York. Not everyone gets to do that. Not everyone gets to invest that time to get to that 5-year benchmark that Women Photograph requires. But we are working really hard to make sure that people who do not have the financial resources to enter competitions, to get to workshops, are being able to get to those spaces. More broadly, beyond that, I would say find your people and find your community, and find a group of people who will support you and will say, hey, I can't do this job, you take it. Hey, make sure you apply to this grant application. That, I think, beyond anything else, and that's what we're seeing now, these spaces that are developing in public and private regions where we are actually creating support networks for each other. I was 10 years ago, I started as a photographer in New York City and did not feel like that space existed, and it was very lonely and very alienating to feel like one of very few young female photographers working in this city. Now we have amazing spaces online, in person. So make sure you find that space for you, and that group of people will take care of you and will help you out a lot.
We had another question.
I think, and I'm going to second what Daniella just mentioned, try to reach out to the like any of our organizations that are, work in the field, work with photographers from all sorts of backgrounds. This is what it makes it hard to work together. But on the other hand, like the diversity of the photographers that that we've got as a pool, kind of like that is our added value. So please, make sure that you reach out to either native, because this is exactly the people that we're looking for. So make sure that, I'm happy to talk to you and see what you're looking for. Also, the workshops that we organize, or the mentorship programs that we're setting up together with Everyday Projects, they're very business focused. So everything that you might have lacked at photo school or university, we want to focus on that. How to deal with contracts, how to, the importance of social media, the importance of having a voice, how to set up an invoice, how to send an invoice, how to approach editors, how to write for grants, very specific business-focused mentorships or tutorials or workshops that we want to give to people like you, so that you have the tools and the mechanism to put your work out there.
But to speak to the pigeonholing, I think that is an extremely complicated, extremely difficult issue, and I cannot tell you, I don't know if Khalid is here, but a member of Women Photograph who is a Palestinian-American photographer, so many of the assignments she gets have to do with female Muslim or Muslim American identity. And she's great at those stories, and she loves the stories, but she also wants to do stories about things that have to do with white identity or LGBTQ identity, anything else. We are all diverse. We are all capable of being generalists. No one looks at a straight white male photographer and says, well, you got to report on straight white men. No one does that, because we create notions of the other, and we have what we believe to be normal standard, and that is unfortunately straight, white, and male, and then everyone else gets somehow assigned to their identity. And I don't think we have an answer to that. I don't think we know how to change that. But what I would say personally is that if you are focused on, and it's important to you to break away from that work, when you are doing your personal projects, make sure that you are covering those issues as well, not just things that are to do with your community and yourself. Right. Because that's what editors hire on. That's when you show them personal projects, that's what they know you're passionate about, and that's how they tell what you want to cover. And so my personal work is I'm an outsider in every single project I work on, which is its own thing. But I think that's the way that I show to editors, these are the issues, these are the stories that I work on. So it's so hard to create a balance, and I don't think we have a good answer to that yet.
But there is an answer, and I think that it's a question of... and I think it is about taking the bull by the horn and being part of that process of change. So here I am, a bearded Muslim from Bangladesh with all the stereotypes about having 4 wives and torturing them horribly and everything else. But, you think of how my country has been portrayed largely by the colonialists. They've measured the width of our cranium, the length of our penis, and put us in boxes and all sorts of categories. So when I got a project by the European Union about doing something on work, I decided I would produce a body of work on the white tribes of Britain. That's what I did. I went to Britain and looked at aristocracy, and I called it people of leisure. And I think at every point, we need to intervene sufficiently to change the dialogue and to question, turn it around. And it will not happen easily. It doesn't happen easily for anyone, even white Western photographers. It's a tough world out there. We need to recognize it's a tough world out there. But it is a fight that can be won, provided we hang on to it and we're tenacious enough.
Would you say that the word you're looking for is that we have to reclaim?
Thank you very much.
Fuck yeah.
Message.
I recognize that as the white male straight person on this panel, that there are lots of privileges that I have, and that makes this conversation different for me than for a lot of others. But I think most of my work is actually as a writer, and I know that something that I've had to do in order to try to get out of this pigeonholing question is, for a long time, people would only hire me to write stories about Africa. And yet I was writing stories about Africa, and I felt like no one was listening. And so, well, how can I get someone to listen to this story about Africa? So I started to write about soccer in Africa. And then eventually that meant I could write about soccer for some different places that had nothing to do with Africa. And then I started writing about the environment in Africa. And then someone said, oh, you can write about the environment. So you can write about the environment in the Arctic, or you can write about the environment in Idaho. So those are other things to be thinking about. You can sort of find ways to bring other subject matters into the stuff that is your pigeonhole and try to break out of it that way.
Yeah, it's all about the personal project, because as an editor who looks at so much work, honestly, I go through maybe the singles or a story, but then I immediately hop into someone's story. Because I was like, that's what you care about. That's what you put the time and effort and energy into. And that's where I know I want to see what you can do with that. And if even in my case, if it has nothing to do with the work that I'm asking you to do or looking for you to do, I see what you're putting into it. It's like, all right, I think this is going to be really great if we apply it to this story. And I like to throw people for a loop sometimes. So if you do something that might actually be based in the area or the coverage that you do, I want to throw you into sports, because I just want to see how you're going to react in that. So there are some editors out there like me, and not many. The personal projects, that is what makes the difference, honestly.
So we're almost out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up with a focus on allyship, actually. I wanted to have us all talk about how to be an ally, and how, as some of you in your questions have sort of brought up, what is the actual what here? How do we do this? How do we move out of this room and this space with the idea of reclaiming and decolonizing photography individually and collectively? And then also want to talk about the survey. So, anyone have any thoughts on allyship? Austin?
Circling back to what I said a second ago, as the white male member of this panel, I think that it's important to, it's possible, it's, as an outsider, it's possible to get involved with issues from other parts of the world and find ways to not just sort of parachute in and tell those stories from my perspective, but to try to bring others along with you and amplify their voices. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it.
Yes, I, as the extreme opposite, the ginger Colombian, I kind of like break stereotypes on a daily basis, and that's kind of what has driven me to break the stereotype and connect with people. So yeah, once you build the bridge, I think that's an amazing step to creating change.
I think we need to build strategic alliances. And, I've traveled a huge distance to be here because I think what we're doing here is part of that. What you're doing here is part of that. And I think it is not a question of creating an antagonistic situation, but working out how we can actually collaborate. And while I've talked about all the things that have gone wrong, it's also fair to say that many of the people who have helped and been beside me at very difficult times are white male picture editors and other people who believe in the sort of things we've been talking about. And I think there are people who do that. They need partners they can trust. They need people they can rely upon. And at the end of the day, we need to be solid professionals that will deliver. And I think once that's the case, there is the basis of something that we can build upon.
And I was just piggybacking off that as well. Just open up your friend base, open up the people that you're associated with, open up the other photographers you hang around, talk to people. At Photoville, it's a diverse group. But it's a diverse group of people around here. So just get to know someone that you might not know. Get to know someone's work that you might not have seen. Just get to know other people outside of your daily circle, outside that circle of friends that you have. Because what that's going to do is that's going to not only open you up to work that you might not see and open your eyes to a whole nother experience that you might not be privy to in your daily life, but it's also going to allow that person to see what your world is like and to understand, because you're going to have things that this person is going to know and they're going to have things that you don't know. So you might be like, oh my God, I'm amazing at grant writing, and this person's like, oh, I don't know how to write a grant. Like, oh, let's share that. Or they might be like, oh, well, I'm going to apply for this workshop. Like, oh, this work, I didn't know about that workshop. So just starting that dialogue and get to know someone that you don't know. This is what we do as journalists. We go out and we meet people and we tell their stories. So let's also share our stories, because that's part of it. It's a give and take. And so if you want people to share their story with you, share your story with them. And we need to be one in a way. So,
just out of curiosity, how many people in this room are not journalists? Okay, so quite a few people
all
here.
right, well, that's
Great.
backtrack.
If you are not part of the journalism storytelling community, interrogate the sources of information that you access.
True.
Ask who's writing the textbooks that your kids look at. Ask who is writing the news articles you look at every day. Ask who's taking that lead photo on the front page of the newspaper you look at in the morning. Interrogate, question, wonder why those are the narratives that we prop up and how we can shift that. That is huge. We need people outside of the journalism community to care and to want that to change too, or we're just shouting into the void. If you are a photographer and you want to be an ally, if you are not of a demographic, speak up. When you see someone being racist or sexist or homophobic or doing something in the field to a photographer, even if it's not something that impacts you, say something, do something, be an ally, be a supporter. We're beyond passivity, right? You've now heard from all of us. You have heard that there are problems. When I was 19 and working at press conferences in City Hall and a male photographer took my camera out of my hands, adjusted the settings, and handed it back to me, I really wish another male photographer had said, hey, dude, don't do that. So be an ally. We all are better as a community. We all are better, more moral, more efficient, more intelligent storytellers when we're helping each other out.
Yes.
We become better. You become better. Everyone benefits. So we have to prop each other up. We have to be allies to each other, all of us.
I think it's worth saying also that we're up here because we love photography. We love journalism, not because we want to attack it or bring it down. Photojournalism, all of the media industry, like many things, are institutions, and the institutions are comprised of individuals who come from particular life positions. And until we start recognizing that and moving away from this idea of objectivity that we can hide behind and not acknowledge our personal oppressions and personal privileges, because those two can also exist at the same time, and we really need to think about that, we can't make journalism and photography better. So we really need to begin with ourselves and bridge that to the institutions and demand more, like Daniella is saying, like everyone here is saying. We want to make this a better information society. We want media to be better, and it's not just about putting more bodies in the room that match up to Pantone colors. It's about actually improving the understanding of the world and making what we look at in the media match what we experience in our daily lives. So thank you all for all of your insight, and thank you for listening to us. Hi, so I know a lot of you said that you weren't journalists. That's cool. Those of you who are, we're doing and thank you for joining us and listening to us. We're doing a survey, and you can reach the survey at bit.ly/reclaim-survey. We should put that up there, but you can check it out at our website. If you go to the Reclaim Photo website, you can link to it there. And this survey is trying to ask photographers all over the world, news photographers, what their experience has been in the industry from the first time they picked up a camera to now. And we're really trying to use that data to address some of the issues we've talked about today and kind of prove that it's happening and we're not just making it up. So it'd be wonderful if you yourself would take the survey and pass it around and tell every photojournalist and photo editor and curator that you know to check it out. Okay, thanks again.